So it sounds like the Countryside Alliance at its core are activists, but instead of having blue hair, you're in tweeds and debarrets. Is that a is that a
I don't
miscaricature?
own any tweed, actually. Don't be mistaken, this is linen. We are activists. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I mean, the Countryside Alliance is a charity. It has charitable objectives, which we take a huge amount of pride in. We're actually a fairly broad church, and we have, a wide range of membership from Liberal Democrats, SNP, Plaid Cymru, Reform, and all those in the middle that couldn't care less about a political party.
Mo, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So you are Director of Public Affairs at the Countryside Alliance, but what does that actually mean?
Well, it's actually external affairs. My colleague James
my
Legg has been
research
our
has
public
spoiled me.
affairs director for many years, and I would never steal that honour from him. I'm the external affairs director. So basically, external affairs is a very broad role, but essentially it's broken down into two things. The first is our external relations with government, political parties, anything from government down to the parish council level, and increasingly a lot of the workload that we have to deal with is actually coming from the local council level as well as government. But also, sister groups, I call them, organisations that we share a bond with or an area of common interest. So like the National Farmers Union, Basque, the CLA, the Moreland Association, Gamekeepers. It's an extensive list, but also some that are broader than that. And the other area that I deal with day to day is media. A lot of media actually in the last couple of months, or in the last year, I'd say time is just completely I've lost track of time, particularly since the general election. The countryside, particularly post budget, is become incredibly salient again. Highly salient. It's in the media all the time. Not least because of the struggles our farming community are facing. But it has just kind of generated an interest more widely in the countryside. So the Alliance is obviously strives to be at the forefront of those discussions. And we have a unique style at the Countryside Alliance. We were born out of essentially a street movement in opposition to, at the time, the Hunting Act, or the build up to the Hunting Act. And that is very much part of our way. It's our spirit. And it's kind of instilled in all the people that represent the CA externally. So, where there is a fight to be had, the Countryside Alliance are more than happy to step in and do it in our own unique way.
So it sounds like the Countryside Alliance at its core are activists, but instead of having blue hair, you're in tweeds and debarrets. Is that a miscaricature?
I don't own any tweed, actually. Don't be mistaken, this is linen. Someone pointed out to me, they thought on GBnews, they said he's wearing tweed, and it's actually linen. And it was on offering in, I can't remember where it even was now. But yeah, no, we are activists. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I mean, the Countryside Alliance is a charity. It has charitable objectives, which we take a huge amount of pride in. But yeah, we are. I would say that's absolutely fair. We're actually a fairly broad church. Our president, Baroness Anne Mallieu, a stalwart of the countryside for many years, is a Labour baroness. Our chairman, Nick Herbert, former Home Office Minister, he is a Conservative peer. And we have, a wide range of membership from Liberal Democrats, SNP, Plaid Cymru, Reform, and all those in the middle that couldn't care less about a political party.
So given that you are putting forth the case for the country, are you just in a continual state of vexation as you fight over everything from shoot saboteurs to government legislation? It doesn't seem like it's a very relaxing job that you have.
Yeah, I mean, I've got friends that do, get rid of the Director of External Affairs title and just call it a press officer, right? I've got friends who are press officers who, it's so varied in what they do. Like, some of them are 99% on the back foot, having to deal with the most hideous inquiries that you can imagine, and then the others who are really like, you know, I don't know, I've got to be careful. I don't want to upset them, but you know, very positive, always on the front foot, encouraging discussion, leading the way. The Countryside Alliance is in the middle. I'd say leaning slightly towards more reacting, because in the main, a lot of what the Countryside Alliance does is try and defend the rural way of life, and you could call that the status quo, because it is a way of life, and ultimately we want to protect it. And there are a lot of people out there. I think they're a minority, but but they're loud. They're very good on social media, and they want to see an end to the way of life. So we are often reacting to them, but at the same time, there are a lot of issues in the countryside that we want to push out. For example, one of my aside from all of the day-to-day things from hunting, shooting, and fishing, one of my passions is heritage, our British heritage. A huge fan of churches, and what they bring to local communities, particularly in the countryside. And so I've been leading for about 4 or 5 years now a campaign to raise awareness about the shocking levels of crime that take place and are carried out against churches. And that's come a long way. When I first started doing it, the Church of England were actually a little bit hostile in their responses. They were kind of, I felt, a little bit in denial. But through discussions, we've kind of reached a place where we're all fighting together to try and get more funding and a fairer deal for places of worship in the fight against vandalism and criminality. And the Countryside Alliance is working with a broad group of organisations. So like that's one thing, and then the other thing will be, so I'm dealing with that, and then suddenly a local council has decided it wants to ban meat and dairy, and I'm going to have to kick off, right? I'm going to have to do that. That's my job. And what I've often tried to do, and I think it's come with a few years' experience, is I get a bit bored of just being reactionary, and I like to try and get on the front foot. So, for example, on the vegan stuff, it was quite fashionable in and around 2020, 2021, for councils to ban meat and dairy and pursue virtue signalling campaigns. And I've decided I was bored of that and had enough. So we actually counter campaigned and put forward our own motions to councils. We drafted them. We found, councils that were open to our side of the debate, which stumped the compulsory vegan lobby, and meant that councils, there's about 12 of them now, have brought in policies that ensure that they are sourcing meat, dairy, fruit, veg, whatever they're catering from local suppliers, British. And there's a clause in there that basically prevents them from being only vegan or from banning meat and dairy. And we're winning that one. We've got massive counties. I mean, Suffolk, Cornwall, Devon, Dorset, Wiltshire, Rutland, Portsmouth City. We're on the roll here. We're in talks with a number of other counties, and it's a much more positive proposal that we have, and we're finding little opposition to it because actually at the core of what we're saying is fairness and balance. We don't care if someone's a vegan or a vegetarian. I mean, who literally no one cares. But what I'm not going to allow to happen is livestock farmers in this country to be demonized by animal rights activists, right? Because that's what a lot of these people are. They're not environmentalists; they're animal rights activists, and the ultimate goal of the animal rights activists is to stop everyone from eating meat. That's the ultimate goal. If you think of the scale of things that the ultimate animal rights activist wants to achieve, hunting is like right at the bottom. Like that to them is small fry compared to the meat industry. That's what they're targeting. And, I noticed that they were targeting local councils because government really wasn't giving them a hearing, thank God. But unfortunately, there were some councils, including Oxfordshire, rural Oxfordshire, that was entertaining it. And they were one of the first councils to ban meat and dairy. They have since, you'll be very pleased to know, accepted that actually it's not really working. because they're having to import all of their vegan produce from, Lord knows where, a massive cost to the taxpayer. And I think that one is slowly coming to an end, and that to me will be a significant occasion. So yeah, there's so much on, but I love doing what I do.
It's interesting the not just been so reactionary. So I was thinking before we were recording, I wondered if there would be any correlation. So I had a previous guest on who was the editor of this magazine, and it was called the Salisbury Review. And the Salisbury Review was set up as sort of like an antidote to Thatcherite politics on the right. So it was presenting a different sort of politics of the right. And it was called the Salisbury Review after Lord Salisbury, who they said was the best prime minister no one's ever heard of. And I thought, oh, this is great. And I read it, and it was quite interesting, etc. And I had the editor on, and then I was reading then more about Lord Salisbury, and he was so terrified of the future that he was such a conservative that his main goal, he said, was to prevent the future from coming for the next 20 years. And I thought that's actually quite in a way, quite a sad approach to life, because there's so much joy to be had in the present moment and then looking forward. And I just wondered, and when you're in your role of trying to conserve what we have, the amazing things that we have, are you in fact actually just been dragged kicking and screaming into the modern age?
I think a good example there would be the lead ban. Okay, so the lead has been, as you probably know, given what you do, a very lively debate within our community for a very, very long time. It exercises a lot of people when the vast bulk of people really don't care. But it's an internal issue, and one that has caused many a row. But the shooting sector, I don't know if you remember, but in about 2019, I think it was actually, went on the front foot, and they announced that we would have a voluntary phase out of lead, and that did cause a stir. Again, it didn't cause a stir anywhere outside of our world, but it did cause a stir. And the view that we took, and it was the right one, was that it was going to get banned, and it could have been banned at any moment. And we based that on discussions with ministers, with officials, understanding the media, understanding the landscape. And it was very clear to us that we needed to be on the front foot. We needed to lead the industry forward. We needed to get people to get ducks in a row. And the way that we could do that was by showing that we were leading, and that we didn't need to have government come down on us hard and cause all sorts of horrendous problems. So, that's an example of where I feel we did the right thing. I think, I'm not a huge shooting expert, but my colleagues tell me that it's done is it's meant that the market for non-lead shot has been able to adapt a bit more. It's been able to come up with more products. That's what we wanted, because that's what the political writing on the wall was clearly telling us was going to happen. And like a lot of issues, and it's not just in our world, it could be in any industry. Sometimes it might be easier to get angry and kind of die in a ditch over a single issue and never accept the need to change in a controlled way. And it gives you that sort of warm feeling inside, even though you've achieved absolutely nothing. But that's not what the Countryside Alliance is charged with doing for its members. We are there to protect, by any means necessary, that way of life. And sometimes we are going to have those hard discussions, internally. I don't take pride in just saying, oh, well, we lost that one, but I know I'm right. And no, that's not pragmatic. It's not going to achieve anything in the long run. Um, you know, a lot of what the Alliance does, particularly when it comes to field sports, so, from shooting, hunting in particular, everything is about social license. It's about what the public are willing to accept and understand. And so we're very, very keen to keep within that remit and not kind of in my opinion, rub it or ram it down anyone's throats. Okay, so we've got to conduct ourselves in a good way. We've got to understand the concerns that public might have and do what we can to, uh, where we can change perceptions. But yeah, I mean that is where we are at as an organisation. We are constantly seeking to adapt and change to ensure that we maintain public confidence. Because when we fall outside of that, that's when politicians turn on you. Because often, particularly with our issues, it's a quick win for them. Yeah, like look at trail hunting. Okay, it isn't an irrelevant issue. It is totally irrelevant to the vast bulk of the British people, not least in the countryside, but in towns and cities too. We know that because we extensively poll on that issue. When you ask the public whether they, their top 10, 20 issues, hunting is not in there, right? But it is a drug to certain quarters of the Labour Party. They cannot help themselves. And they are looking for any excuse they can to make that issue relevant and highly salient. So, yeah, as I say, a lot of what we do is just trying to navigate our community in line with public opinion.
I wonder what your thoughts are if we take, say, the city-country divide, because I was thinking in terms of the recognition of animal suffering, if we just use that as quite an isolated case. So the trail hunting ban, the hunting ban of '04 was introduced to prevent the fox, hare, and deer suffering anymore. And as we know, and we could potentially discuss later on, that's not been the case. It's actually done worse. And then I was thinking on the flip side as well, there's a complete lack of recognition of the animals suffering with a new law they've introduced. They've now classed deer as pests in Scotland because there's no apex predator for the deer, and then the deer eat the young trees, and we need the trees for practical purposes, but also for environmental purposes of sequestering CO2, etc. But in labeling them as pests and just saying we need to cull X amount, I wonder how many people in Holyrood Parliament who represent or who voted for it have ever lined up a deer in sights of a rifle, have ever seen the body of a deer recoil from the impact of a bullet, have ever had to process the carcass of a deer. And there's just that removing of actual reality, which is there's real animal suffering or death happening. And yes, it's necessary because we need certain targets for certain trees, etc. But there's this disconnect on both sides, be it trying to preserve the animals, but then also just complete blanket, we need to get rid of them, sort of in the process of the deer. And it's like there's a lot of humanity needed when navigating our relationship with the countryside and the relationship with the animals that are in the countryside.
Yeah, no, totally. It's why I always say, part of what Jeremy Clarkson's been doing is very, very helpful. He doesn't quite go into the full details. He's yet to colour deer. I wonder if that will happen. I hope it does. I think it's important that he explores that area.
Just on the down low, I don't know. This is not public information whatsoever, but I won't say. But I know a gamekeeper who knows a gamekeeper who's taken Mr. Clarkson out deer stalking, and apparently he is a crack shot when it comes to deer. So, but that's not public information. So you can't say that on GBnews.
Well, I'm extremely excited about the next episode because I briefly met him at a rally for farmers back in October, and he was very happy to see my Countryside Alliance board. So I'm praying that I get that snippet of fame on what is now my favourite programme. But back to him, right? He has massively helped slowly, sensibly bring the wider public into understanding that farms are not just places where animals have cozy little lives and yokel farmers sit on hay barrels with straw in their mouths and everyone's happy. He shows the reality of the countryside as well as farming, and often the grim reality for a lot of people and the issues that come with livestock and animal management. I it's a really interesting topic because if you look at polling, public attitudes towards like the culling or the shooting or killing or hunting um, of animals, that's the word that YouGov likes to use, hunting, but what they mean is shooting. It's such a niche thing, but it really annoys us all. Hunting and shooting are not the same thing. This is not America. Um, they, I can't remember the top of my head, but off the top of my head, um, the public don't care about the shooting of grouse. They completely understand grouse and pheasants, and lots of birds actually. But deer, despite there being a lot of coverage about the importance of controlling deer populations, despite there being pretty much acceptance on both sides of the divide from our side to George Monbiot's, that actually we do need to control deer numbers. The public aren't there yet. I've got friends who I've said, "Oh, come around and we'll have a bit of venison." Friends brought me, a haunch, and let's. And they're like, "Ooh, oh no, I couldn't." So there is something there, and it is the riddle wrapped in what is it? A riddle wrapped in an enigma wrapped in mystery.
Yeah.
It's trying to understand public opinion. And I actually did my masters in public opinion. Okay, I spent a lot of money on that, and I still haven't got a clue. I still don't get it. But that's why it's such a tricky discussion to navigate in the world of PR. Actually, one of I don't know I don't know how often you read the Shooting Times and how avidly, but there was a superb column from a guy called Guy Adams, who is a Daily Mail feature writer, very amazing writer, often on Guns on Pegs, Scripound, forgive me. A superb writer, countryman, keen shot. Talked about PR and shooting, and to a degree hunting, but more so in shooting, given the fact it was in the Shooting Times. And he talked about the best PR for shooting and a lot of our world being little to no PR at all. And that will ruffle some feathers within our community. And honestly, Joe, the amount of times I've heard, you just need to go out and you need to show everyone how brilliant this is and how more people should be doing it. And I'm like, no, that's not how the court of public opinion works. It is by and large a niche world, right? It is it's not like angling, which is a massive sport, or football or rugby. Shooting and hunting are small. That's not to say their impact in the countryside isn't significant. It's hugely significant economically and socially. And I've always been really interested in that because what Guy Adams argued, and I couldn't really disagree with it. And I say that as a man that works in PR for Field Tools, but there are times when I know when to insert ourselves into a discussion, and that can range from a council banning pest control. I remember there was this bizarre story in I want to say Wiltshire, where a local town council, which had been just packed full of very odd people who thought that banning rat control because it was cruel was a good idea, despite the fact a river ran through the town. And that's the kind of story I will snap into action on, because what I'm able to do there is talk up the benefits of, in this case, pest control, or the controlling of an animal, in a way that helps our argument more broadly, but in a way that the public and the punter, the average person, goes, "Oh yeah, of course we need to do that." Right? So that's what I'm always looking out for. I remember there was another one, Antes. I think it was out of the trail hunting season, and they were bored, so they decided to pick on a load of scouts up in Cheshire, who had been doing a little demo on a, I think it was rabbits. I think they were learning how to skin and butcher a rabbit, right? An important life skill. I hope you know. I hope you know how to do it. Uh, an important life skill, and what a fantastic way for these kids to have access to nature in that way and understand the importance of harvesting their own food. But obviously, to the antis, that is literally red rag to the bull. And they were abusing the kids and they were attacking the parents, and it got really ugly. And that was a way for us to wade in and go, absolutely not. Here's the importance of doing it. Also, look at your horrible people picking on kids for enjoying and understanding the countryside. So that's a lot of what I do as well to advance what we do to normalize that way of life in a way that, as I say, the average person can go, okay, yeah, it's not for me, but I get why you're doing it. And I guess that's why, back to that YouGov polling about, there being, overly large acceptance of the shooting of grouse or pheasants, it's because they see grouse and pheasants and they think food. And they think someone going out, shooting, bringing it home, eat. I think that's why they believe it. The surveys themselves don't explore that much detail about it. I'd love it if they did. Perhaps that's one for us to do. But that's, I think, the connection is there. Whereas the kind of Disneyfication of deer, Bambi,
Yeah,
I
Bambi.
think has been a bit of a barrier. But I think it's one we're going to win, And I think, we often talk, one of the big things we're doing, and I get really overly excited about this, is getting venison into schools, working with Eat Game and helping promote what they're doing. They're doing a fantastic job. Eat Wild, forgive me. They're doing an amazing job. They've got some exciting things down the line I can't go into, but they are great. And that's, I think, how we normalize it. We break down that barrier and they look at it and go, pest species, need to control numbers, equals good for countryside, also extremely delicious.
Interesting. The mention of grouse is it's a hot potato, I'm sure, in the industry that you're in. I was on a grouse moor a couple of weeks ago. I think it's like the 16th of August. Not shooting, the podcast not doing that well. I was just walking the dogs. But the grouse moor in which I was on is very interesting. It was like an ecological desert, and this anonymous family bought it. And in about 3-4 years, they've spent £36 million on it, building houses, employing people, putting in roads. And it's a sporting estate through and through, but then they're building a larder and then a farm shop so that all of the meat, which is harvested on the estate, can then be sold to the local public. And then they're building a pub on the inside. So far, they spent 36 million. They're going to spend probably the same again. And I just think, wow, and that wouldn't be there. That money wouldn't have come in if all of these sports had been banned. Or I know of another grouse moor about an hour away from where I live in Perthshire. And the guy spends £2 million a year on payroll alone. So that's keepers, housekeepers, groundsmen, etc. And I thought, oh my goodness, imagine if all of that money disappeared from that rural Scottish glen. It would just be a decimation.
Yeah, I mean, I hope you saw the spectacular grouse or banned grouse shooting debate in Westminster Hall a couple of months ago. And if you haven't,
I thought you see Sunak's speech. It was pretty good.
Yeah, it was superb. I had the misfortune or pleasure of sitting directly behind Chris Packham, and years of him never knowing, of course, but battling in the media with him and his often appalling narrative about our community. It was a really strange experience for me to sit so close to him and to be in his presence. It didn't change my mind whatsoever. But if your viewers and listeners haven't seen the highlights of that debate, you can find them quite easily on our website and social media. But that was an extraordinary afternoon. Now,
could you just give some context as to what was debated, what was said, etc.?
So there have been, this was the third debate triggered by a parliamentary petition, which gained over 100,000 signatures to ban driven grouse shooting. And Wild Justice, so, Ruth Tingey and Chris Packham had been pushing it on and off for years, and they went for round 3. I don't know what possessed them to do it. It was a genuinely, if I'm trying to come at this neutrally, it was a really big mistake for them, because they've been beaten quite badly the first 2 times. The number of MPs who are willing to go and speak in favour of grouse shooting and its associated whaling management is immense, right? There's loads of them. Certainly in the last Parliament, but they went for it again in 2019. Oh, sorry, 2024. So it was, they got over 100,000, and it was accepted as a debate for the 3rd time. But the reason I think they did it is because they thought, well, Labour's got a huge majority. A lot of the Conservatives who had been there previously are gone, and so this is our chance to really finally get them 3rd time lucky. And actually, what they got, I thought that from our side of the fence, I thought they were going to do that. I knew we could mobilise some people cross party, but I thought that they would have the numbers, and what actually ended up happening was one anti-grouse shooting MP had turned up, Olivia Blake from Sheffield Hallam, who has been at least the last. I think she was at all 3, and she's definitely at the last one. So she was just wheeling out the same old boring arguments that we've already, dismantled. But what I don't think Chris Packham et al. And the League were there, all of those groups, RSPB was there. I genuinely think that they thought that it would be a walk in the park, and actually they were humiliated. I mean, actually humiliated. For the Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who, all politics aside, he is a well-respected man. He is. Most people don't dislike Rishi Sunak, be they Labour or they don't see him as a bad bloke. For him to stand up, he's not a very controversial person, put it that way. For him to stand up and effectively dress down Packham, because I was sat behind him, I could see it. Right, I could see the occasional glance as he was landing his blows in a really delicate, passionate, but strong way. And you could literally see Packham put his head in his hands. He could have just been rubbing his head, who knows? But I mean, it looked like his heads were in his hands, and they were shocked, they were stunned. MP after MP after MP, Conservative, Liberal Democrat. We had Labour. We had a Labour MP come out and defend grouse shooting and moorland management, and it showed that when you equip your allies with the facts, they are eloquently able to go in and dismantle the animal rights activists, because that's what they are, very easily, because they don't actually have many facts. They have a series of kind of jumbled bullet points, and they try and they're overly emotional. But in a chamber like that, it just doesn't work. It doesn't cut through in the same way. It's not picked up very well. So yeah, do watch that. But that was a really fascinating point. And the main thing that MPs were talking about was employment. There's no need to go in there and talk about how lovely it is to spend a day grouse shooting. I mean, most people don't care or aren't interested. What they are interested in, though, particularly as politicians, is rural employment. A lot of these MPs represent communities where, if it weren't for grouse shooting and associated moorland management, it would be pretty bleak. Not just ecologically, but economically. There are a lot of people, either directly or indirectly, that depend on a good shooting season and a successful grouse shooting season in the uplands. And hearing that, the arguments that we make all the time in the media and wherever we can, being read out by like Rishi Sunak and all the others, was really special. Added to that, just watching the complete and utter meltdown and annihilation of our opponents. If they think that they can do that again, a petition like that again, I mean, good luck. Okay, I would be highly surprised if they did. They actually helped grouse shooting. So thanks, Chris Backham and Ruth Tingu. Your complete lack of political and public antennae has helped further grouse shooting and the arguments that the Countryside Alliance makes.
I'm surprised the RSPB were there, because surely if you remove the grouse shooting and associated moorland management, then the amount of birds on the moor would just deteriorate rapidly. Like, without the pest control, without the controlled burning, all of the ground nesting birds would just disappear. And paradoxically, there would be less grouse because there would not be the investment of trying to keep the population up and running. So that's a real surprise.
Yeah, it's not a surprise to me because
No shock, yeah.
I have noticed over a long period of time that the RSPB, forgive me, are becoming quite, if not already are, obsessed with shooting. They will use any excuse they can to try and stick the knife in when it comes to shooting. I mean, I before I joined the Countryside Alliance, I do come from the countryside, but I wouldn't say I was completely au fait with all the different groups and organisations. But I wouldn't have, you just said RSPB to me. I would have thought decent enough people, nice people. What's the problem? But being on the other side, I'm now like, oh gosh, they are quite obsessed ideologically, I think, with shooting. And it's really concerning, actually, because they are ignoring the same arguments that Chris Packham, etc., are ignoring. I'm not sure if he's still their vice president. I think he is, actually. Quite why you would, as a respected charity, have someone that has stood on a stage calling for people that bank, I think it was with Barclays, to stick their heads in a bucket of fire and set fire to it and still keep them on you as your VP is beyond me. But yeah, as I say, I wasn't surprised to see them.
It's interesting the RSPB have, if you mention ideologically, have come a long way from their origins, because I'm pretty sure they were set up by a couple of aristocratic wives who wanted to preserve certain birds for their hats. So they would have like exuberant feathers for their hats for on Sunday service or weddings or whatever. So
Well, what's that old tagline though? Yeah, you forgot about the birds. You forgot about the birds. I don't know if you also remember, Joe, the RSPB that I'm used to. I don't know if you remember, but there was a extraordinary outburst on their Twitter account a couple of years ago where they accused Michael Gove, Rishi Sunak, and I think Therese Coffey, who was DEPRA secretary at the time, of being liars. It was over something to do with water pollution. An extraordinary outburst. And it was a real, bit of scandal. And the chief executive of the RSPB, I think it was Becky Spate. She said, "Oh, it wasn't us. It wasn't agreed by us. Whoever got control of it was an intern, and they didn't know what they were doing. And we're so sorry." But that story was very iffy to me. I didn't fully buy into it. But what was eye-watering about that whole issue was that the RSPB and United Utilities have a very close relationship. They work together. I mean, you can Google it. I mean, they do a lot of stuff together for obvious reasons. But I could find at that time little to no reference to the RSPB ever condemning or even vaguely criticising United Utilities, who were basically at that time, I think they could still be, I'm not sure, don't sue me, you. They were Britain's worst polluter, like of the water companies, and they've been fined serious sums. And in and around the time that they were fined, serious hefty penalty. The RSPB the following day, or within a couple of days, did a joint press release with them about the reintroduction of water voles. I just felt that was extremely poor judgment on the RSPB's part. I felt that the RSPB should have, even if you're working with water companies, you should have it out with them. If they've done something wrong, if they're polluting when you're a nature charity, Nature's Voice, you think you'd be the one on the front line going after United Utilities. But they didn't. So I thought it was a pretty hypocritical thing to go after the government on the issue of water pollution when they were working so closely with Britain's biggest water polluter. And I made that point in the Telegraph, and we had a lot of fun with that. And I wrote a big piece on it. Actually, it's my favourite piece I got to write. I got really stuck into it because the one thing I cannot stand is hypocrisy, and when I see it, I'm going to pounce on it. And that was blatant hypocrisy. So my kind of view of them has been tainted by that to a degree. I know, look, there's some great people in the RSPB. There's absolutely great people that work there, passionate people, love our countryside, love birds. We have a crossover of membership, right? We've got people who are CA members and RSPB members. That's a great thing. But my concern, like with anything, is the top and the priorities the RSPB have. I'd like us all to be on the same page and trying to push for the same thing, but calling out prime ministers and people as liars when you've got your own questions over your own relationships of bad water companies. Yeah, I thought that was a point I needed to get out there.
It's interesting them and Chris Packham advocating for, say, grouse moors just to be left, say,
they don't have
not interfered with, which is quite weird in a way. I remember that there's a great quote by the late Sir Roger Scruton who said that the countryside is not a slice of untilled nature; it's a human creation, built over centuries.
Yes,
and I think it's quite interesting when it comes to the city-country divide. And I really don't want to make it like an us and them.
No.
That's just not helpful to anyone. But the thinking that the countryside is best left alone and completely uninterfered with is actually, they're often unaware that it would just be an ecological desert. And the rich, fertile
100%.
countryside that we see is often a man-made creation. And I know this guy who plants hedges. He's sort of, they would just call him a hedgeler, and he works for DEFRA, or he's self-employed, but he does a lot of hedgeling for DEFRA for the subsidies or whatever. And he is really popular amongst the rewilding group. And he just thinks it's hilarious because the hedge is like the most unwild thing ever. Like, it's got great ecological benefit. It's like the most man-made thing in the world. Like, nature doesn't create hedges. It's like, at like conventions, they come up to him and tell him what a great job he's doing. And it's just, there's this complete disconnect between those in the country and those who think that they might know what's better for it.
100%, Joe. And it's a point I often have to make, whether it's about veganism and banning livestock farming, which is a mad idea, but it's one that we have to challenge regularly. Whether it's, the rewilders, or even in farming. A lot of the time, when I'm speaking even to supporters, in my speech I gave back in February at the rally in Westminster, I focused a bit on the fact that it's not just the food that we have to thank farmers for, it's for essentially managing and protecting the countryside that we all get to go out and enjoy, because it doesn't look like it does by coincidence. I'm sorry to say that it isn't Mother Nature. Mother Nature certainly has an impact and an effect, but it is managed by people, by humans. And if you take them away, it will become a desolate wasteland. I really enjoy telling people that, particularly vegans, because and by the way, not all vegans. The vast bulk of them are nice people who have their own views, and it's the certain core of them who want everyone else to be vegan. I have to fight a lot, but those guys never have an alternative. They just don't. They'll say, "Oh no, what we'll do? So you take away the livestock farming, we'll just kind of rewild the cows, just let them, put them out to pasture, basically, and we'll bring in a load of bison and bears and wolves and lions and God knows what else, and everything will be okay. It will return to its natural state." And you sometimes get fairly serious people coming out of this stuff, and you just think, what planet? Like, what planet are you on? That's not going to happen. If you take away livestock farming, as you know, what is it, something like 60% or roughly of land is unsuitable for growing anything other than grass. We are left with nothing. And I think rewilders as well have got it all wrong. I think they've completely got their PR wrong as well. And I'm sure within the rewilding movement, if you want to call it that, right, you've got some genuine people in there who have got some really exciting views about certain species reintroduction that we should all listen to, and we should, have a proper adult discussion and sensible discussion about. But unfortunately, the core of them are militant. It's their way or the highway. Everyone else is essentially a dinosaur that wants to keep the countryside in the past, hates nature, sees it as a playground and a place where you just factory farm, which is obviously so far from reality. But they don't help themselves. I actually think that the term rewilding is going to have to go. It is so toxic in the countryside, and it didn't need to be. But it's the people that advocate, as I say, not all of them, but a lot of them who advocate for it. It's become political for them. It's like an ideological thing. It's almost becoming a bit wrapped in, I would say, left wing thinking, and that's really not good. Um, and I find, as I say, there are some excellent people in it within that world who make some really important points. But as I say, they've got an image problem. They've got a serious image problem, and I think it's so toxic that there are now people on, I could say, our side, or should I say, like land managers, farmers, gamekeepers, who now don't want to listen, because they're like, no, it's become too toxic, and we know that you now don't like us, so we're willing to have a normal adult conversation with you, which is sad. Yeah, that's a sad thing. So yeah, that's that is a lot of what we deal with our opponents. And you don't want to spell it out and be arrogant and rude, but when you do ask, okay, but what's your vision of the countryside, and you get that back, you just think, I don't know if we can ever resolve this. But it's like the right to roam stuff as well. Like they're not massively different. Okay, the right to roam movement, which is popped its head up from time to time. It was making a lot of noise in the build-up to the general election, although Labour actually dropped the right to roam from its manifesto. So I think they probably realised actually that a lot of the people behind the right to roam were politically quite toxic. Um, there's a big difference between right to roam and access. From our perspective, we want access in the countryside. We want people to come to the countryside, enjoy it, respect it, obviously, but come here, learn, understand. That's how we preserve, right? That's how we preserve our way of life with more understanding. But the right to roam community, or shall I call fringe, because they are a fringe, really, they aren't interested in that discussion. To them, it's about land ownership. It's about ownership. It's a form of Marxism. That's what they want. That's what they want to do. They don't like the idea of people having private land, and again, has made the discussion around access difficult because you've got two extremes. Actually, not even two extremes. You've got one extreme who just make it really hard again to have a sensible discussion, which is sad. And the countryside doesn't benefit from that. A lot of what we try and do is bring together the two sides and find a way forward. But you're going to get wings on, particularly that side, that you cannot work with, because that ultimately, in my opinion, their goal is not to help the countryside. It is pure politic, and that's not what it can be. That's not what it should be about.
It's interesting on the politics front. So this current Labour government, many would deem as quite hostile in their demeanour and legislation to the countryside. But the current Labour government and leadership has come quite further right since 2019. So in terms of how the manifestos or pledges or promises have shifted from 2019 to the general election last year, what's happened on the left of politics in relation to the countryside?
It's a really good point. So I will go on a little bit of a history trip back to around, not too far back, don't worry, but back to around 2015 onwards. Labour gradually lost more and more seats and more votes in the countryside post Hunting Act. Okay. And I always tell people this. It's not necessarily because they were obsessed with hunting or so passionately pro hunting. It was that they didn't like that their community had been used as a political football. And by community, I mean countryside, the rural community, had been used as a political football by the Labour Party to distract from other issues and essentially partake in a culture war. It's one of the early culture war issues. In fact, it might have been the culture war issue. Um, Fast forward 2015, 2017, Jeremy Corbyn comes in. Party goes even further backwards. 2019, he's still kicking around. And the party has an animal welfare manifesto, which is not welfare, it's animal rights squared, which commits to banning grouse shooting, banning trail hunting, banning everything. Right? It was a horror manual as far as what I'm concerned. And we all know what happened. 2019, they got absolutely obliterated, right, by Boris Johnson. It became a Brexit election. The people at the time were fed up with, the back and forth in Westminster and just wanted to get it done. And Jeremy Corbyn was kind of all over the place. And yeah, so they literally got zero. I mean, they got nothing. They were totally irrelevant and so far removed from the countryside that they were basically extinct as a party and as a brand. So we quite quickly, after Keir Starmer became leader, brought back some of the earlier work we did in around 2015 with the Fabians on trying to get the party to take the countryside seriously again, putting to them that if you want to win a majority, you're going to have to make some gains in the countryside. You're going to have to get seats in not just rural but semi-rural urban areas too. And there was a contingent within Labour that were happy to have that under Ed Miliband, but under Corbyn, it just wasn't a conversation we were anywhere near having. And Keir Starmer comes in, there is an appetite for it. We wrote a report, Elephant in the Countryside. Again, it's easily available online, and a lot of what we're arguing there is coming back and useful again. But it was to focus, basically, get Labour Party to not be swayed by, its more militant anti-rural MPs from urban areas, and just to focus on really trying to deliver Labour values, right? Labour policies for rural people in the same way you would in, I don't know, Barking or Dagenham, because a lot of the issues that are affecting rural people are the same issues that are affecting urban ones, and trying to get them not necessarily to get on board with hunting or shooting, but to understand it. And certainly with shooting and angling, we did get a long way. And Keir Starmer, he attended the NFU conference. He delivered that famous speech where he talked about respect and basically what we've been telling him to say for years, and he delivered it really well. And there were people in the countryside that were okay with the idea of a Labour government. That they thought that, okay, I think Labour have really got it. I mean, you've got to have hope. You can't spend your whole life being a cynic, right? You have to hope that the point you're trying to make is cut through with our leadership, no matter what party they are. And then the budget happened. So they won a load of seats, right, in rural areas. The exact number is debated, but I go, it's over 100 rural seats. I want to say 120. And when I say rural, I don't just mean specifically rural. I also mean your kind of marginal, big towns, but with rural around it. But they're not quite classified as rural, even though to me they are. So they've got a huge presence in the countryside again. I know a lot of those MPs will deny it, but they probably say, "I did not see this coming. Yeah, I didn't realise I'd get elected here, but here I am, and I want to stay. I want to stay elected. I want to get re-elected." And then the budget happened, and before anyone could even get over the general election, the Labour Party had decided, or the government, the Treasury, had decided that they go back on what they promised farmers wouldn't happen and just say, no, we're going to, bring in the family farm tax. They hate me saying that, but that's what it is. It is a family farm tax. And just cause absolute devastation in the countryside so quickly. And the wrongs of that policy aside, and there's plenty of research out there from the National Farmers Union, the CLA, CBI, experts galore, right, telling them, begging the government to listen to them, listen to the damage it's going to cause. But um, they politically just made such a big mistake, right? It's such a foolish thing to have done, to achieve and come that far, to make serious gains in the countryside and then just throw it all away, in a kind of very callous way. And we've spent a lot of our time post-budget talking to Labour MPs. I mean, Labour, the government of today is in power for 4 years. It is important that we all talk and we're all trying to work together. And I felt that a lot of rural Labour MPs felt they'd been thrown under the bus. I mean, totally disregarded, because that urban mindset in Labour HQ in central London has probably dismissed the countryside vote, right? It's gone, oh, we don't actually need it. Wrong. Totally wrong. I mean, it's not for me to tell Labour strategists what to do, but I would say to them that you're going to get challenged in the red wall. Based on current polling, you're going to get seriously challenged in the red wall. Your inner city kind of, London seats, or in Birmingham or in Liverpool, Leeds, probably not Liverpool, but Leeds, you're going to get challenges from the left field. So you're going to get your Greens, you're going to get this new whatever party, I think they haven't come up with a name yet, Jeremy Corbyn's one. You're going to get them. You're going to get challenged by reform in Redwall, and in the countryside, actually, you could have been in a position to defend. Probably not all of them, but certainly some. And when you're losing seats on your other flanks, you need to be sensible and clever about where you hold elsewhere. But they don't think like that. They don't want to think like that. They don't want to listen, and that's a real shame. But there is a ray of hope. There is a ray of hope. Labour is a tribe, and it has tribes within the tribe. And, I think if you compare Labour MPs to Tory MPs, if you threaten a Tory MP with their chances of getting re-elected, they are going to lash out, right? They don't care about what the whips have to say. You saw it in the last Parliament. Labour MPs, I would say, are more reserved. That's why I think when they rebel, it becomes more of it's more of a what? But I think effectively Labour MPs have started to unionise, Labour rural MPs have started to unionise and have each other's backs a bit more and operate as a unit, which is what we were saying they should do. I think they were all very new when the budget came in, and they're a bit scared. Getting elected is a daunting thing anyway. But a lot of those guys didn't know the processes, and they were probably too scared to speak out. I'd like to say I would have spoken out, but we're not MPs that are a bit blinded by the processes of Parliament and the whipping system, and it can be quite intimidating for some. But now they're unionising, they're coming together, and it's a Labour Rural Growth Group, and they're coming out with some really exciting stuff. It's very early days, but that is absolutely a vehicle for us as a rural sector, Countryside Alliance, but also all the other organisations, to reset relations, because that can only be a good thing, right? We need to reset the relationship if we actually want to help the countryside. And the government are serious about actually delivering for Britain and not just certain parts of Britain. If they want to bring the countryside with them, we need to urgently reset the relationship. And I think that grouping of MPs, there's about 30 of them now, but I think it will grow, it will definitely grow, is the way that we achieve that. And as I say, being at odds with the government or Labour is not a good thing. It isn't a good thing for the countryside. This is not a great place to be. You will know, Joe, and listeners will know, IHT, inheritance tax, despite the fact that the farming communities, as it were, is not exactly, it's not a massive electorate, right? But it's what I call the farming adjacent vote. So it's like the friends of farmers, the family members of, the people that work with farmers. It's a big tribe, a big community. It is the topic of conversation still. They genuinely thought in Labour HQ that, and in the Treasury, but I mean they're so far removed, that this issue would go away. But they've politically totally miscalculated it. There's been marches. There's still marches. There's a trailer of truth right now going from Truro all across up to Liverpool for the Labour Party conference on the Sunday, taking the message to towns, villages, cities. Spreading the message of why IHC changes are terrible, but also of how British farming is on its knees. That's not going to go away. It's not going to go away when in April 2026 when the changes come in. In fact, it's going to get worse because the real effects of those changes are going to be felt, and the media are going to be there to amplify that pain and anxiety, because that's what the media are there to do, right? From that farming community, and it's going to dog them until the next general election, and it never needed to. And all actually our side of this argument have ever asked for is understanding and respect and the ability to all come around the table and go, we get what you're trying to achieve, Chancellor. We understand that you have a difficult economic brief. We understand that. But what you are currently proposing in its current form is going to hurt the people that you claim you don't want to hurt. And you being in denial about it is not going to achieve anything. It's gonna have serious consequences. So can we find a way forward? You say you want to shut the loophole down to people that use it for tax exploitation. I don't know any farmers or anyone in our side of the debate that doesn't agree with that, right? We're not saying that those people don't exist. They do. We know they exist. We're not, so yeah, fine. Okay. But the people that you literally said you didn't want to hurt, you're hurting, and you're hurting them majorly, and you're refusing to listen. And that's all we've ever asked for. We never said U-turn either. We've never called for a U-turn. We said a rethink. And I really hoped that they would make concessions and compromises. And I'm an optimist. I'm going to keep fighting, and I'm sure the NFU and everyone else is.
You need to be an optimist in your line of work.
Oh, you've got to be an optimist. I'm actually not the bigger. My CEO Tim Bonner is the best optimist. He gives me so much hope. But I can be a pessimist. But no, I've got to keep fighting. There's a community. The farming community feels really, really hurt, and I won't go into any specific details, but some of the calls I have with farmers can be dark. They can be really frightening for anyone on the receiving end, knowing the pain that they're feeling. And I was at the Pembrokeshire County Show recently, and I was speaking to a representative from an amazing charity called Tir Dewi, which was set up a few years ago by volunteers, and it deals with rural mental health problems, specifically in the farming sector. And they were saying that their calls are shot up, because it is a really scary and worrying time on top of everything else that farmers have to deal with. And I, like I'm sure other people in other organisations and my colleagues at the Countryside Alliance feel we have a duty to go out and fight for them, and we're going to fight for them. So we've got to maintain that optimism. And I just hope that the government do listen. And I'm encouraged. One of the things that has come out of all this, though, Joe, I would say, is for a long time the countryside has probably been quite sleepy politically. That's not to say that the previous Conservative administrations from 2010 onwards weren't, were glorious when it came to the countryside and farming and, gamekeeping and everything else. But nothing quite jolted into street protests, and people didn't feel they were losing everything and that they were not being heard, and that there was almost an ideological pursuit against them. Now that's what they feel, and there is a lot of energy out there for farmers, country folk, farmer supporters to fight back and to kind of go on the front foot and use this whole debacle as a way to talk to the public about the importance of British farming. And the polling's there as well. The British public absolutely love their farmers. This is what Labour don't get. It's so stupid their own voters, Labour's own voters, support the farmers against the family farm tax. They've totally misjudged it. So I hope, being, from the Countryside Alliance perspective, as I say, born out of the street movement, that it's something we can use, and it's something that we can work together on and mobilise and do something with in a really positive way. As I say, that there are things taking place over the next few weeks, demonstrations, protests, rallies. I think that's a good thing. It's a shame it has to happen, but it does have to happen. We can either sit and moan about that, or we can get on with it and just do what we need to do. But I think fundamentally the relationship between farming, certainly at the moment, and the government has changed. There are a lot of people in the countryside that don't want to listen to Labour. They're not interested. They don't care. And for the government, that's not great, right? Because when they're actually delivering things outside of farming and agriculture and but more generally, say on healthcare and education, it isn't cutting through with rural voters anymore. It's just gone. They don't want to talk about it because that elephant in the room's still not been addressed, and there's been a refusal to do that. What a shame, for Labour. I say that apolitically. What a shame, because they could have really done something with that. And I hope that this Labour Rural Growth Group is the answer to reconnecting and rebuilding. Because as I say, we've got these guys for 4 years. We need to make sure that we can do our very best to get the best for the countryside. And we'll fight to do that. And I'm sure our colleagues elsewhere will do so too.
If I was to take you back, Mo, to the start of the conversation, you said that you used to work a lot with churches in order to fight against the crime that happens on. I was wondering, is that just a cultural interest in which you have in preserving the churches, given their history and the impact that they've had on us culturally, or is there an element of personal faith of yourself invested in that?
No, I'm not particularly religious. Actually, I don't come from a Christian family. I wasn't raised Christian. I am one of those people that I would never describe myself as an atheist. I do believe. I'm just not quite sure how I can put that into a camp. And what it is, right? I think most of us are on a journey of some sort. There's some that are absolutely nailed to their particular strand of Christianity. I don't know. I'm just in the middle, and I try and navigate life in the same way that we all do. And I love and I admire people with faith, whether that's Christian, Muslim, Hindu. I admire it. I'm jealous of it, actually. Sometimes I am. But for me, it is cultural. I see the church as the symbolic of my country, and I think it's a really important institution, not just in urban areas, but when it comes to countryside, in the countryside. The church was, and still in many cases is, although is unfortunately in decline, the focal point of rural communities. There's two things actually. My two passions in life is the church, the preservation of the church in our heritage, but also the pub, right? So I'm like those two things. If I can achieve keeping those two things, thriving, I would be a very happy person. And the church, as I say, the church is a place where, as I say, I wasn't brought up Christian, but the church was a place where, as a child, I would go and have activity lessons. I would go and learn. I would be with other kids. It was a place where, in the countryside, our community came together, and that's a really special thing. I think if we lose that, particularly through neglect and crime, the church will have its own mission in terms of getting attendance up. That's not what I can help with, but what I can try and help with is protecting them and getting the government to help them, because they are on the front line. As I say, back to what I was saying earlier, like there was a lot of denial. There was a lot of denial about the fact that the problem is as bad as it is. We're talking tens and tens of thousands. I should have written the number down. Tens and tens of thousands of crimes, ranging from burglary and theft to arson to vandalism to assaults against parishioners and clergy. Happening on a daily basis, and have been since 2017. Now, that's as far as my data goes, so obviously it goes further back than that. And it's got worse. And for me, it's been about, first of all, getting it out there, getting people talking about it. And now it's, every other week I've got we get an alert saying Countryside Alliance Church Crime Report, which is really good because it's clearly inspiring conversations, not just here in the UK, by the way, but in the United States and also in Europe. I regularly speak to counterparts in Europe about it. And yeah, for me, it's preservation of culture. But to me, as I say, back to it, when I think about a village, I think about a church and a pub. My actual village, though, and I'll never forgive my parents for moving us there back in 2002. In hindsight, I'm sure they meant well at the time, but it doesn't have a pub. It doesn't have a pub. No. But we love the area, so I'm sure they'll stay there forever. But it doesn't have a pub, but it does have a beautiful parish church. And as I say, it is the focal point of the community because we don't have the pub. But yeah, I'm forever envious as the neighbouring village who has like the best pub ever. But yeah, that's how I see our countryside. I want to protect that. And yeah, part of that is accepting there's a problem. And as I said, it's taken a long time to a degree to the church. And that's not me having a pop at the Church of England by any stretch. But they were in a really difficult position, right? Because from where they're sitting, they don't want people to see churches of like crime-ridden hellholes where you're going to get attacked. Like they believe in the church being an open place for everybody, right? And so the narrative for them was a quite hard one to balance, I guess. But now, they're very much on the let's fight back. In terms of their statements they put out, and we are working with the police. We're working with like the Churches Trust. They're brilliant to protect it. And as I say, it's a keen passion of mine. But I'm always asked if it's about personal faith, and it's for me it's culture. It's about protecting it.
The reason why I asked, and I realised it was quite left field, given that we were just talking about the Labour manifesto like 3 minutes ago. But the reason I asked was, in Genesis, man is given dominion over the earth. And what does dominion mean? It means stewardship, caretakership.
Mm-hmm.
And if we look at what you're doing in the modern day, there's a preservation, a stewardship in which you're trying to prescribe to those who don't have it, but also encourage those who do have it, of an encouragement of looking after the countryside in which we have. And whilst there's a political strands to what you do, there's personal strands to what you do, I was wondering if you had factored in the biblical strand to what you do into the larger scale. But perhaps we could...
Well, it was a fascinating question, actually. And maybe it's something I need to go and reflect on.
I bet you didn't get that question on GBnews, Mo.
No, I haven't actually. I do love GBnews very much. I think they do ask me all sorts of questions. I was once dragged in. I was there talking about rural crime and ended up talking about that the delays at Heathrow Airport once. I mean, it's just a brilliant channel. It's a new channel, and it's come a long way since it launched. And I will say this, I want to work with any media, whether it's new media, whether it's your parish council magazine, whether it's our amazing industry. We still have an industry magazine, from Field Sports Journal to The Field, Actually Life. We still have a quite buoyant magazine industry internally. But I want to work with everybody. But GBnews, I must say, are very interested in rural affairs. They definitely see a connect. And it's something that I know a lot more of the people that support us are watching. And I like working with the BBC. I've got my gripes with them like anyone else, but generally when I'm working with the BBC, I like it. The problem with the BBC I have is that they very rarely come at me in a way that, let's work together to do this story which is clearly of interest to your community. It's more, have you got a response to these lot again who are saying X? And I'm like, or they don't at all. So they'll put up, every few months they'll put up something that's probably anti-shooting, right? And they don't even have a comment from our side. They haven't even bothered to come to us. And then they file it, and this is a very niche press officer gripe, but they file it without a byline. So you'd have no idea who's written this piece and how to get hold of them, and you can't change it. And by that time, the damage is done, right? Your side of the story hasn't been heard. Whereas with GBnews, I've had a lot more interest in what we do, and some fierce debates, I will say. I mean, God, some of the rows I've had with people on there. But that's what I love. That's what we should all love. That's a good thing. And if there's anything we should know from this week, it's the importance of debate and free speech and treating each other with respect and kindness. But yeah, so so I don't know if you have you been watching GB News? Are you a Sky man, an
I,
ITV man?
I watch you on GBnews, Mo. There you go. How about
Good answer.
that?
That's a good start. I try and get everyone in recruited to GB News. No, I don't. But yeah, no. As I say, they're fascinated in the work that we do, and they love the countryside. So that's good. And we've got to have those conversations. A lot of people say, "Oh, GB." The other day, I was I was on talking about the Glorious 12. And it was an opportunity for me to talk about the benefits of grouse shooting to moorland communities. And I remember somebody took a pop at me and said, "Oh, well, I wish you could have made that point on the I think it was BBC." And I thought, I'd love to. I would love to go and do that, but they're not inviting us to do that. They're not giving us that platform in the same way. I'm not saying all the time, but not so readily. And actually, the assumption that everyone that watches GB News, which is probably one of the fastest growing news channels in Britain, if not the, and regularly beats Sky and BBC, the idea and almost sort of arrogant assumption that everyone that watches it is on our side is total nonsense. They're not. There are a lot of people that watch it that don't get it and probably want to learn more. And I have just as much responsibility to target those audience members as I do those that listen to the BBC. That's my job. So I will talk to literally anyone at any time. I've done every TV imaginable. I've done Estonian TV at one. I do whatever I can to put forward our our message and promote the rural way of life. I'm honour bound to do it.
Great. Mo, thank you so much for your time. It's been a lot
Thank
of
you.
fun. You've been very interesting. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. Thank you.